Hello, everyone. I'm Pedro de Moraes Garcez, and today it is my honor to interview on behalf of the Brazilian Association of Applied Linguistics, my advisor for life, Frederick Erickson. Thank you very much, Fred, for taking the time to talk to us and to our viewers in the future. I'll start by introducing Fred by reading his bio from the National Academy of Education. So Frederick Erickson was professor of anthropology of education at the University of California, Los Angeles in the United States from 1998 to 2011. And there from 2000 to 2006, he was director of research at UCLA's Lab School. He received his bachelor's and master's degrees in the history of music and his PhD in education at Northwestern University. His contributions to the field of anthropology of education have earned him numerous honors and awards, including Spencer and Annenberg Institute for Public Policy Fellowships, a Fulbright Award, and the Spindler Award for scholarly contributions to educational anthropology from the American Anthropological Association. Erickson's writings on the microethnography of classroom and family interaction, and especially how this interaction affects disadvantaged students, continue to be widely cited. And in fact, in Brazil, perhaps one of the most widely read pieces by Fred is the one on culturally responsive pedagogy, which had many echoes in the teaching of Portuguese in Brazil, in fact. He has also written extensively on qualitative research methods for social and educational research, and in fact, for applied linguistics, because as we will probably talk about later, Fred had huge impact on the thinking and doing of research in applied linguistics in Brazil. His most recent book, Talk and Social Theory, Ecologies of Speaking and Listening in Everyday Life, published in 2004, received an Outstanding Book Award for 2005 from the American Educational Research Association. In 1998-99, and again in 2006 and 7, he was a fellow in residence at the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences. And in 2014, the Council on Anthropology and Education named in his honor its annual Outstanding Dissertation Award. So thanks again. It's our honor to hear you. And after this sort of formal introduction, I would ask you to say a little bit about how you see yourself. How would you introduce yourself these days as a researcher?
Okay, well, it depends on who the audience is. To education audiences, I say that I study face-to-face interaction as a learning environment. And when I'm talking to linguistic anthropologists, I might say I was a linguistic anthropologist with a in the study of face-to-face interaction. Early on, really early on, I thought of myself as the world's only applied ethnomusicologist, going back to my formation in the study of the real-time conduct of social action, in music, but then also later in people's face-to-face interaction and speech. So, talking to sociolinguists, I use the label interactional sociolinguistics. That's kind of the John Gumpert's family name for what we do. So that's that.
Okay. Your career is a long one. These after your early work in the 1960s. So at that time, things were very different. You didn't have videotape, and today we have all kinds of technology. So my first question is, with the benefit of hindsight, how do you see the research scape today as far as the analysis of social interaction and ethnography or microethnography is concerned, especially of language and social interaction? Where do you think there's been progress, say, in relation to where we were 30 or 40 years ago?
Yeah, well, even longer. When I was a graduate student, it was about 55 years ago. And discourse as a term didn't really exist yet. That was sort of on the horizon. I took a course in culture and communication with Ethel Albert, one of my teachers, and she said discourse will be the next thing that people will study, relationships beyond sentences in speech. And ethnography of communication was brand new as a term. And at the same time, Chomskyan linguistics was in its heyday by the mid-60s and then into the 70s. The whole awareness of how important speech and the real-time conduct of speech in relationships of mutual influence among people who are interacting together, that was only really beginning to be apprehended. So if you think now of how people are more and more persuaded that we need to be able to look at the nuances of speech and of other aspects of social interaction, and that we never see speech apart from situations of social interaction, whether they're face-to-face or machine-mediated. That insight, really wasn't there. There was still a kind of a hangover from Saussure. And so it's changed tremendously. It seems to me now, applied linguists especially realize that we have to pay very close attention to the details of performance in social interaction, and that in fact it is situations of social interaction that are a primary learning environment for learning how to talk, learning how to communicate, but also learning how to conduct social life. That's been our evolutionary career as a species, and it's the fluidity of that, the fact that talk doesn't continue seamlessly and without subtle shifts, or that registers are signaling social identity and language switching, and the whole notion of separate languages begins to be called into question as we look in real time at recordings of what people are actually doing from moment to moment. That now is called sometimes multimodal discourse analysis. The idea that people are continuously in mutual influence, relationships of mutual influence and attention in face-to-face interaction, and that's how we make meaning with both speech and nonverbal behavior. That is now taken for granted, I think, by many people. But when I started out, it really wasn't. And so, in that sense, there's been tremendous progress. And I think of some milestones recently. Charles and Candy Goodwin's work, and Chuck Goodwin, his magnum opus, published right before he died, cooperative action, that summarizes his work. There are people all over the world who are taking this kind of multi-sensory, multimodal, multi-party looking at how talk comes to have meaning in social interaction. Nick Enfield in Australia. There's a student of Gumpertz's, Hubert Knoblauch in Germany. Carrie Jewett is someone who's worked on multimodality and interaction in England. Jürgen Streeck here in America, and Mark Ciccoli, a young linguistic anthropologist who is now at the University of Virginia. He just has a new book, a wonderful book people should know about. It's called Saying and Doing in Zapotec. Just came out this fall with Bloomsbury Linguistics. And it's this wonderful combination of participant observation with some long-term relationships he's had with families in Oaxaca. And he videotapes them in everyday activities that involve artifacts, people, talk, nonverbal behavior, and cooperation, very much in the Goodwin sense. So that's substantively a real sea change. And if you think of the tribal divisions in some of this work, even with critical discourse analysis or conversation analysis or interactional sociolinguistics, all of them pay close attention to fine details of performance, right? And the old, now old ideal Chomskyan view of how humans do meaning, we realize just it's part of the story. Grammar is part of the story, and lexicon, but it's way beyond that. And if you're trying to teach people, as applied linguists do, you've got to pay attention to the enactment of speech, and we could even say that following the New Testament, we have an awareness that we never see the word apart from its situation in use, and so So the word made flesh can be a slogan. Verbum caro factum est, as it is in the Latin. Then the other thing, of course, you mentioned technology. When I did my early work, I still used 16 millimeter film, as did the earliest students of this kind of dynamic ecology of interaction in what came to be called context analysis. In order to go somewhere and videotape people, I had to fill the back of a small station wagon with boxes and equipment and whatnot. And now I can take a little GoPro camera and some recording equipment, or just use my cell phone, and I have a small carry bag that allows me to do everything that we used to do much more elaborately, and that means, of course, that we can get almost anywhere to do recording, and that people do record. I mean, everybody is using their cell phones, so that the idea of recording is something that's not alien anymore. In the old days, you felt as if you were kind of a stranger from Mars walking in with all that stuff, and now everybody videotapes themselves and their friends, and so it's changed in that sense. We also have technology for analysis that permits, among other things, the kind of horizontal transcribing that I've advocated and used in my own work. That's now much easier to do with systems like Elan, that was developed at the Max Planck Institute in Nijmegen. And there are other systems. Every few months there's new stuff. There's a new journal. Now I've forgotten the name of it. I'm on the editorial board, but that's focusing on new technology for study of interaction, an international online journal.
Well, maybe you could say something about despite the fact that we have all this technology, it's still hard to see with the human eye all the detail, and you've always been concerned with modeling good practice. And why don't you talk a little bit about this website that you put together, which is sort of like a course with various experts, doing and the thing of looking and learning. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, good. That was another thing I was going to say about technology. But just one other thing before that. It's also now possible to distribute the recording across people as they're moving in space, so that people can be wearing a camera, and you can document where they're looking as they're interacting, and we also have now a very inexpensive 360-degree camera. So now if we want to videotape a dinner table conversation, you can put the camera in the middle of the table and see everyone around it. There's all kinds of things like that for information collection. But as you point out, the crucial issue is still, what do you do with that analytically? How do you learn to look and listen to minimally edited recordings of what people are doing in interaction? That, I think, is not something, except at a very gross level, that machine analysis can do. And so a few years ago, we put together a conference, and it's now represented on a website, which is called Learning How to Look and Listen.com, one word, Learning How to Look and Listen.com, where we brought together some of the pioneers of this kind of ethnographically inspired study of face-to-face interaction. And everybody looked at the same 2-minute segment of videotape, and was then videotaped watching and talking aloud about it. And so you get to see Chuck Goodwin and Jürgen Streeck and Barbara Rogoff and Adam Kendon, people like that, watching and telling you what they're paying attention to in the video recording, and it is a great resource for teaching. I've been using it as I teach still an interaction seminar, interaction analysis seminar, and looking comparatively at what people notice, and of course what they don't notice, because when we pay attention, we can't ever fully attend to everything all at once, so that our attention has to become disciplined and focused, and that's the craft of this kind of analysis, is learning how to do that in a systematic way. So yes, there's and of course that kind of documentation of the work of analysts wouldn't have been possible to do 55 years ago either, right? So there's all kinds of possibilities, and the limits, I think, are not those of technology, because that will continue to innovate. The limits are our research imagination, and that we still have to, I think, cultivate as a human enterprise.
Yeah, and well, since we're talking about technology, with the pandemic and even before, we're doing more and more of interaction over something like this, screen to screen and all that. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on things like ethnography, because microethnographic analysis of interaction was meant for co-present interaction mostly, and that's the matrix of human sociality and all that. But then now, all of a sudden, we started doing like part of our days in front of screens and all that, and even classrooms are organized in around a computer or various computers. So what are your thoughts on that? Is that something that, changes a lot, or is it possible?
Well, it's, I have mixed feelings about it. First of all, there's just on the internet wonderfully interesting video footage, YouTube and beyond, so that if you want to do microanalysis, you can find interesting examples, and that's one way the technology can be used in research, and people are doing that. I have colleagues now at Georgetown in the linguistics department who have been studying food shows, cooking shows, and how one addresses an audience, and kind of the sociolinguistics of that, and the ways in which the presentation of talk and interaction with the cooking equipment and even the foodstuffs that are being used are signaling social identities and all kinds of sociolinguistically interesting things. So that's a possibility. A difficulty with it that I see is that you don't get face-to-face participant observational knowledge. But if I could go and live with Julia Child, as an ethnographer, I think I would be able to do an analysis that was more, hermeneutically, interpretively informed in an ethnographic sense than if I just watch the production of something like that. So that's a disadvantage. In terms of interaction and the study of interaction as a learning environment when it's mediated on the internet, I suppose I haven't tried it. I mean, I'm now teaching that way with my interaction seminar, and as a learning environment, it partly works. If I were to be studying it formally, I would want to be looking for some of the same things that context analysis emphasized from the beginning, which was how in real time are people exercising influence on each other? How do people react to listeners' reactions as they are speaking? You're nodding at a breath group pause in my speech stream, and that helps me know that you're actually paying attention to what I'm saying, and your face changes expression, and so we can see some of the same things that we see face to face, and I think. I think the understanding of interaction as an assembly of attention, which was Goffman's way of putting it, and then the various behaviors that people attend to, we can trace some of that using internet interaction as an example. But there's a lot that's left out. And so it might be for the future interesting to try to do some do something where you can see people actually face-to-face, and then also those same people interacting on media, and try to get a sense of what the affordances are for face-to-face communication as contrasted to the machine-mediated. I mean, the other problem with the machine is that, you know, I can't smell you and you can't smell me. There are whole aspects of the sensorium that are involved in face-to-face communication, and that's the way, as a species, we evolved to do meaning together and to learn in face-to-face relationships, and those sensory experiences just aren't the same. But there may be some analogues, you know, and humans are capable of synesthesia, you know. There's been some work on that, probably again in neuroscience. The you know, people's hearing sounds and seeing color, all that sort of thing. It may be that we're learning to use the information media a little bit metaphorically, and some of that may make up for some of the sensory deprivation, really, that we have using this. So I don't know. It's remains to be seen.
Yeah, also thinking of school ethnography in a wider sense, since kids these days are living their lives to a large extent on or through social media interactions, sometimes we might have to look at those parts of their lives to
Sure.
get what's going on in a classroom, right? Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, sure. And so we need to see what the overall noosphere is for people, and to the extent that the internet becomes part of that, that's something to be studied. And you know, I mean, even I was thinking about historiography. Historians study letters um, uh, very largely. That's one of the ways that people do history, is by looking at written correspondence, and that's neither face to face nor simultaneous in time, but there are relationships of influence across successive letters that are very important for trying to understand the meaning perspectives of the people who are writing and in dialogue with each other that way. And we talk about written dialogue. So there's probably possibilities for this. Um, I'm 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 not planning to do that myself.
Yeah, well, I think there are younger researchers who are really the best. You know, they've probably been born into a world where the internet was already there, so they're the natives.
Right.
We'll let them do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been wonderful. And to close our interview, I would like to maybe remind some of the younger viewers of this interview that applied linguistics in Brazil has changed quite a bit in many ways, and also methodologically, from let's say the early decades of the 1970s and 80s. And in part, I would say your visits in the early 90s and your seminars to Brazilian applied linguists at the time, I think have been quite influential in a move away, or perhaps in the direction of qualitative ethnographic research in a way that would not, be haphazard, but methodical. In other words, I would say you should be credited for some advance in our methods in applied linguistics in Brazil from the 1990s. So why don't we close with some comments you might have about that time you spent with Brazilian applied linguists in the early 90s?
Well, it was wonderful experience for me. I felt it was, over a series of years in the early 90s, I would come for about a month at a time and be run around to different places each time. And they worked me very hard. But, whenever you teach, you also are learning. And it was exciting for me to meet the applied linguists of that cohort, and I'll mention some of the principal names. Mariuda Cavalcanti at Campinas, and Stella Bertoni in Brasilia and in Rio, Luis Paulo Muita Lopez, my student from Penn, Carmen de Pintos, and of course, your teacher and our friend and colleague, Branca Rivero, and her friend, Lucia Quental. We had Lucia's family had a beautiful country house outside of Teresópolis, and I mean one of the memories I have is that a bunch of us gathered there for a long weekend, and we watched video and talked about video analysis and recording, and it was a wonderful experience. What happened, I think, is something that's very important in academic life. What happened was that there was a creation of a kind of invisible college of applied linguists who through our meetings and then their continuing interaction afterwards really shaped each other's work, especially in empirical work in classrooms. But the notion of invisible colleges and people drawing on one another for advice and help is very important, and it was a thrill for me to be a part of that. Another thing I remember vividly is near the end of those times, a meeting in Rio. There was a big meeting of some kind, and we did a symposium on the kind of ethnographic microanalysis approach. I remember, and I got some tough questioning from some of the Brazilian linguists and applied linguists who had become aficionados of the critical discourse tribe in Lancaster, and they were pushing me on the relationships between larger social processes so-called macro social phenomena, and the microethnography. And I had to, really think about how microethnography isn't simply micro, because what we see in the conduct of everyday life are both local, opportunistic, agentive, mutually influencing action taking by particular people. We see that, but we also see the workings of social class and race and various forms of domination and resistance, and that grilling was one of the influences that led me to the book Talk on Social Theory. I thought, well, I really have to do my social theory homework and try to articulate a way in which all of this fits together. It's not just macro, and it's not just micro. So I learned a good deal from what I thought of as akin to St. Paul's missionary journeys through Turkey and what is now Greece and Syria. I had missionary journeys in Brasilia and Campinas and Sao Paulo and Rio, and I learned a lot. So I'm very grateful for that experience and for the camaraderie. They're wonderful. They were wonderful people to meet.
Great to hear that it's been productive both ways. Well, we're running out of time, and so I wonder if you want to say anything to close before we close. And I thank you very much for your time and for giving us the opportunity to hear you again.
Okay. Well, just let me start. Go back to kind of where I started. Human social interaction is the fundamental learning environment. If we really want to understand learning, we have to see how it happens in real time with real people, whether they're face to face or whether it's in machine-mediated interaction, and there's no substitute for looking at mutual influence in real time. That's how humans communicate meaning to each other and coordinate actions together. And it's the capacity for human coordination of action and sharing of meaning that has enabled our social and cultural evolution. So it's absolutely fundamental stuff, and we're just at the beginning, I think, of appreciating that and knowing how to study it. So I think the future is bright in that sense.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you very much once again. It was great talking to you, and I hope our viewers will get a chance to think through this, especially because we'll have subtitles in Portuguese, so everybody can read you and hear you at the same time. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.